Thank you, everybody. Now, there are bios for all the panelists in the flyer that you all got. So I'm going to be keeping my introduction brief. We have a timekeeper here, Katie. Katie, will you? Everybody see Katie? All the panelists see Katie? She's going to alert the presenters when they have 1 minute remaining. We've each got 10 minutes, as you know, and then she'll let you know when the time is up. She's going to be bad cop. I told her I really don't like being bad cop. So. First, we're going to hear from Rail Policy Advisor Greg Gormick. He's going to speak about how the rail safety issue flows directly from the lack of government policy and inadequate capital investment. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Naomi and Katie, Ellen and Patricia. I'm going to start off by typically being Greg Gormick. I'm going to counter some of the things you've just heard. Question, Mike? Is it on? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to counter a few of the things, or question some of the things we've already heard. Naomi, you said that the fourth factor is government not doing its business. That's the last factor? No, it's not. It's the first factor. I also heard that we all live with risk, and if we live near railways, we are at risk. Yes, you are. I live at mile 171.6 of the CPR Belleville subdivision, which is the main line that carries all the crude to the Irving refinery. I can see it. My cat watches the trains every day. Behind that is Highway 401. It scares the bejesus out of me more than the railway does. So risk, yes. But there was a statement made, and you're not railroaders, but it does put my back up as someone. I'm a fourth generation, or a member of the fourth generation, my family that's worked for the railways. And I've worked for the railways a lot. And I love the railways. Doesn't mean I love railway companies, but I do love the railways and the power of them and the potential. Profits before safety? If you ever spend an hour in a professional situation with railroaders, you would find how wrong that is. But I will tell you, what is it work? It's when you got Wall Street breathing down your neck, and you don't get a goddamn cent from government. And I don't mean the Harper government. I mean the Harper government, and the one that went before it, and the one that went before that, and the one before that, because this stretches right back into the 1970s. And I'll tell you, there are two governments of different colors that have equal amounts of blood on their hands when it comes to what has happened to our railways. You spoke about high-speed railways, electrically powered. Yeah, I love it. You know something? I'm in a battle right now to save the passenger trains. I'm dealing with about a mid-20th century railway system that's been allowed to rot, has been pushed into the ground by governments, red and blue. And I'm a little bit sick of it. Okay, the slide up. Can we get the slide that I had up, please? This is not the cause. This is a factor. Nope, still not up. And I really do need it. It's money. It comes to money. I'm going to tell you something. As a somewhat railroader, trains are really expensive pets to keep. It is the most capital-intensive industry in the world. And it has a lot to do with the problem that we're facing right now, which flows from policy. Okay, look at the railways. Those are the big seven, the Class 1 railways. Look at where CN and CP place. And let me explain a little something about these railways. Kansas City Southern is spending more than it takes in. That's because their system rotted for years and now they have to catch up. Burlington Northern Santa Fe is a different kind of railway. It belongs to one man who says, I have a social compact with America. That's Warren Buffett. When he took that railway over, it was because he wanted long-range, steady returns, not high spikes every quarter. So he told Matt Rose, the president of BNSF, you're not spending enough. You start investing in this railway because I want to have the best goddamn railway in the world. Canadian Pacific's a little bit up this year. That's because they got a new guy, and he's no fool. I'm sure some of you don't think too much of Hunter Harrison. Full disclosure, I was a speechwriter when he was the executive vice president at CN. Hunter is not a stupid man. He's not my favorite man in railroading, but he's not stupid. And he's remaking the railway in his image right now, so they're spending. But look where CN is. Anybody remember when we owned CN?
And we spent billions on CN, and for good reason. And a certain government, not of the current persuasion, sold it off in 1995 for cents on the dollar. And one of their transport ministers, who's a friend of mine, said, I think we made a bit of a mistake. No kidding. It's policy, folks. This thing about rail, there's too much rail by oil. Naomi had it right. There's too much oil. Now, I don't know how many of you would be willing to do it, and I hope there are only a few of you, but I'd like to ask. How many of you people came to this meeting by car today? Could you put your hands up? We're oil pigs. We better get our snouts out of the trough. This thing about there's too much oil moving by rail, well, if it doesn't move by oil, it's going to move some other way, maybe by truck. And that would be even worse than what we've got now. And if you want to help this, well, stop driving, have a more energy efficient home, give up plastics, don't have a pool that needs chlorine, stop using propane in barbecues. We can all do our bit, but we're not going to be able to do it all. We are an oil-soaked society. Now, is there a better way to do this? Yes, there is. Why do the railways run that way? Why do some of those railways, particularly the Canadian ones, have such a low level of reinvestment? Well, it's not their decision, it's government policy. And I'll tell you what happened in North America. After the Second World War, basically people went, trains are old-fashioned, get rid of them. We'll just start stuffing airlines and airports and highways with government cash like it's a turkey at Thanksgiving. Well, if you starve one and feed the other, guess what happens? But oh no, that was okay because it was, you know, the boundless faith in free enterprise, which I agree, I'm a freelancer, I agree. Capitalism, great, but it can go too far. And when you're funding other forms of transportation and not one, you know what kind of a collision course you're on. Now, we do not put money in railways in Canada. It's just that simple. There's nothing going on right now. We starve via, it gets nothing, it's chump change. CN and CP, they don't get anything. But I'll tell you why it's a little different on that American side, because what those figures don't explain is they are now engaged in what truly are public-private partnerships, like the one that built the Canadian Pacific Railway. Government doesn't have enough, but they want something done. Private sector wants to do something, but they don't have enough money. Well, we get together and we share the risk and we share the investment and we get mutual benefits. That's what's going on in the States now. And it's largely the Obama government that's done it. Not to be partisan. But how they've done it is very intelligent because their system was worse than ours, much. When I was a kid in the 70s, 25% of the U.S. railway system was in bankruptcy protection. The big joke down there was that one of my friends, well, somebody you would know him, he's David Gunn, the retired president of Amtrak and the former chief general manager of the TTC and 4 other big systems, and a former employee of the Santa Fe, the Illinois Central, the New York Central. He said his favorite thing was the number of standing derailments they had when the system was collapsing. That's where a freight car sitting on a side and stationary just goes, woof, because the track collapses under it. And that tells you what's going on. Well, the United States, and it happened under the Republicans who were scared out of their wits about what would happen to their economy if the railway system went down, they started putting money into it in their own funny kind of way. But they didn't continue it. And they had big problems. Well, under the Obama government, they have developed, hooray, a national railway plan. And from the National Railway Plan will come, or from the National Railway Policy, I should say, comes the plan. The plan is then partially made up of statewide railway plans. 49. The only reason there's not Hawaii in there is they have no railways. And the Obama government's smart. Well, if you want some government money to help with your railways or pieces of the railway system in your state that are important to you, you have to have a plan. So no plan, no money. Carrot and stick. Now they sit down with the railways and they come up with plans where, look, you can't afford this, but this project would get all these trucks off the highways. All right, we're willing to do it. You sign here, you're going to guarantee this. And I would also add freight railways that take money from the federal government and state governments. They learn that you don't really get that money if you go out and kick the living daylights out of the passenger trains and the commuter trains. So it really works on many levels. It is working, and it better start working here. We need change, because I'm telling you right at the very bottom, beyond safety, beyond the social aspects of it, there is no such thing as a modern economy with an inefficient railway system. And as David Gunn likes to say, you know something? The most profitable railway is also the safest because you've invested in it consistently. You don't cut corners, but that's what we're doing. But safety does cost. It also pays. You heard positive train control. Well, I've been a big proponent of that, and I'll tell you, you mentioned that topic up in Ottawa, except with my friends from the Green and the Green Party and the NDP. Everybody goes berserk. It's going to cost about $15 billion to put it in the States, but I'll tell you what it would have done. If it had been in place, as soon as those cars started moving at Lac-Mégantic, it would have been detected, and they could have stopped it. We need that. We could build a bypass around Toronto, not too far out. You can't get too crazy here. You can't make the railways go an extra 100 miles because we want them competitive to keep the traffic off the highways. But what we're dealing with, and it was mentioned, there's a disconnect. Government doesn't know what they're doing about this. They don't really care. The private sector will take care of it. The railways don't want to talk to government because it's a nightmare when you talk to bureaucrats who know nothing and are not interested in doing anything. So basically, to wrap it up, since I just got the high sign, I'll tell you how we bring about change. October the 19th. Ask your candidates. Hey, this is nice, your favorite rail safety. Can I see your party's policy book? And I don't want motherhood and knee-jerk. I want things in here that tell me you know what you're talking about, and you're going to do it, and you've costed it. I could say more, but I think that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Next up is Christine Collins, the National President of the Union of Canadian Transportation Employees. Ms. Collins will be sharing some of what she's learned from her members, and she'll also be giving us some specifics about what needs to be done at the policy level to increase rail safety.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you for inviting me here tonight. This is the second time I've come to Toronto to talk about this very serious issue, and I am very impressed with the turnout and the deep feeling that seems to be in the room on this subject. We're the National Union for Canada's Safety Inspectors in Transport Canada and for the Transportation Safety Board Accident Investigators. And as the union, we're in the position of being able to raise the issues, make numerous recommendations that our members bring to us directly with Transport Canada senior management. Unfortunately, although they always receive the information and receive our advice, it's rarely listened to or acted upon. But I think the tragedy at Lac-Mégantic has awakened Canadian municipalities to the risk of dangerous goods by rail. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Transportation Safety Board have done some good work since the tragedy. And Transport Canada has introduced, as you know, a number of changes to the rules that will assist in making the rails safer, possibly today, but more in the future. In particular, the changes to the tank car requirements, the changes to the clarification and responsibility for classification of dangerous petroleum products, and the new obligations for corporate oversight for dangerous goods by rail, they're all positive changes. However, it's not nearly enough. The fact is that Transport Canada relies too much on safe regulation, called Safety Management System, as the primary means of protecting the traveling public. SMS is the process by which industry determines its safety protocol and how it will apply the regulations. And this is just plain wrong. The Auditor General in that report said that Transport Canada were not doing enough audits of SMS. And for the first time, we saw in the Transportation Safety Board report a reference that more SMS audits needed to be done in rail. Well, in actual fact, direct inspections and SMS as an additional layer is what is needed. You don't take away one and give to the other. Because what the audit really is, in plain language, is the company does its own inspections. They fill out the forms to say what their inspections found. It comes to the auditors, not the inspectors, and they check off boxes. Well, no, we don't have enough trained SMS auditors, that's correct. And we are fighting not to have our inspectors become box tickers, because that's now more and more following the aviation mode. That is the way that rail is going. We support SMS, contrary to what you might think from my previous statement, because it does encourage a corporate safety culture, and it incorporates safety into business practices. However, the fact is that when confronted with the trade-off between increased safety risk and profits, I can tell you that the private sector will always choose safety over profits. When the regulator says to the transportation company that they are in charge of safety, will the transportation company make correct decisions? I don't think so, especially for the smaller operations who have a very sensitive bottom dollar line. An operator like the one responsible for the tragedy at Lac Mégantic is the case in point. So UCT supports SMS as an additional layer of safety, and it should never be a replacement for direct and unannounced safety inspections that are backed up by regulation and enforcement powers and conducted by highly qualified Transport Canada inspectors. All our inspectors, regardless of the mode of transportation, believe the same thing. There's nothing more effective than unannounced and regular inspections, and it's very regrettable that Transport Canada does not seem to believe the same, and they're putting all their focus and energy into SMS. We believe that another part of the problem that resulted in the Lac Mégantic tragedy is the way that Transport Canada is organized. The Transportation Safety Board reports on the accident, points this out, but TSB fails to make any significant recommendations to fix the organizational dysfunction at Transport Canada. We believe that the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Inspection Branch should be reintegrated into the corresponding safety divisions. The Rail Transportation Dangerous Goods Inspectors should come under the Rail Safety Directorate, and they don't. Currently, the TDG branch is a separate division and is responsible for inspection of dangerous goods in all modes of transportation, and this is just plain wrong. We believe that there should be one accountable executive at Transport Canada, and this executive should be responsible for all safety within a particular mode of transportation. In this case, the responsible executive should be the Director General of Rail Safety in Ottawa, and this DG should have all the inspectors in the rail mode report to him or her. And this would include rail safety inspectors responsible for the transportation of dangerous goods, as well as the rail inspectors responsible for compliance and enforcement. Currently, Transport Canada's convoluted reporting structure appears to be designed more for the bureaucratic buck passing than it is to ensure proper accountability. In situations of responsibility, confusion, and ambiguity, everybody points the finger at someone else. And this is again what happened and what we saw at Lac Mégantic. Currently, Transport Canada safety divisions are trying to manage two different oversight systems, direct inspections and SMS, with the same inspectors. And we believe these functions should be completely separated. The time has come to introduce an independent office of whistleblower protections for transportation safety, as they have done in the United States. This office would have the power to investigate complaints and take action while offering job protection to employees that blow the whistle. The Transportation Safety Board recommendations can sit on Transport Canada's desk for years before any corrective actions are taken, and this is wrong. There should be a prescribed and enforced time limit on Transport Canada's implementations of Transportation Safety Board recommendations. And there should also be a requirement that inspectors who have the expertise serve on all follow-up committees or working groups who are addressing the TSB recommendations. One of the things that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is asking for is that municipalities be given advance notice of dangerous goods transporting through communities. And unfortunately, Transport Canada has said it is not possible to provide this information in advance. The railways have convinced Transport Canada that this information would be prohibitively expensive to provide, and therefore annual reports of shipments that are all that is available. When I was here the last time, I had the opportunity to speak to some of you, and I went back and I followed up, and we've met and we've asked that be looked at more seriously, and the answer is no. Do you know that there are literally thousands of reported transportation safety incidents every year? Incidents must be reported as part of the regulatory requirements. Transport Canada should provide a web-based, searchable database for safety incidents that stakeholders would gain insights from. This would allow municipalities to search the incident database to see if one intersection or one area of the community has an increased number of safety incidents. There's much more that I could say about rail safety, but these are the highlights of our recent recommendation to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities. Unfortunately, this committee is dominated by government MPs more interested in embarrassing witness and correcting problems. And that's why this forum, like others across the country, are extremely important to transportation safety in Canada. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Our third panelist is my old friend Bruce Campbell, the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Bruce has written 3 reports about the Lac-Mégantic disaster. Over to you, Bruce.
Thank you, Naomi. Nice to see you again. I'm not a rail safety expert. I learned a lot about rail safety in the last 2 years, almost, since Lac-Mégantic. I do know something about regulatory policy, something that I've followed for some time. So when I, like many of you, watched in horror as Lac-Mégantic unfolded, I thought, well, maybe there's something I can contribute in terms of the understanding of what happened. I also, I was reading at the time a book called The Ocean Ranger, which is an account of another oil disaster off the coast of Newfoundland in '84, and it provided me, if any of you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, that it provided me a lens through which to look at and analyze this that I just didn't have before. And then finally, and I learned this not that long after, that my close colleague at work lost 3 of her family members at Lac-Mégantic, including, I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but those 2 little girls, that's her. And so that was an added motivation to really stick with this and to try to understand it. I don't know if you saw this piece in the Golden Mail. It came out on April 6th. I mean, the front page was Duffy, but that's not what I was looking at. It was the back page. And the back page, there, it's the right side up, was basically a commitment from the Golden Mail to keep covering this issue. And basically they said our coverage won't stop until the government and the rail industry can assure us that there will not be a repeat event. That's our promise to the victims, their families, and our readers. It's our promise to Canada. Yes, you're here. And My basic point is that unless we know the full extent of the regulatory failure, the multiple regulatory failures behind Lac-Mégantic, we can't be assured that the safety of our oil by rails transport system will be there. And in the course of my work, I've identified multiple regulatory failures. It's not one regulatory failure that caused Lac-Mégantic. It's regulatory failures interacting with each other, reinforcing each other, and their cumulative effect was that they created the conditions for a perfect storm. Now, the government has put some measures in place to improve safety, but they're far from adequate. The industry continues to resist in a number of areas, including transparency, including issues of fatigue management, speed, and so forth. And the government continues to obscure the full extent of regulatory failure. They're still in denial about their role, their responsibility in this. The basic line is that we put the rules in place, and these people, the employees of MMA didn't follow the rules, and therefore that's where the responsibility lies. There have been a number of internal investigations at Transport Canada. They haven't been made public. There's the Commons Committee report that's under tight political control. I don't think it's revealed. I mean, there has been new information, but it really hasn't really pointed the finger at the extent of regulatory failure. The TSB report that came out last August, we learned a lot from the TSB report, but there's still a lot more unanswered questions. And the government would like the TSB report, the Transportation Safety Board, to be the last word. But I think it's only one chapter, and there's more to come. And I pointed out problems with the report itself in my last report. And I don't know if anybody saw the documentary by the French Fifth Estate. It's called the Enquête. And they had a copy of the draft report that was presented by the investigations team to the board itself. And what they discovered was there's a real discrepancy when you look at the conclusions in the final report and the conclusions in the draft report. There are 18 causes and contributing factors in the final report. In the draft report, there's actually 27. And it seems to me that the most significant of those omissions had to do with single-person train operations. That why wasn't single-person train operations, why that Transport Canada granted this company with this atrocious safety record over the objections of employees at Transport Canada saying we shouldn't grant MMA the ability to operate these huge unit trains with one operator. And the National Research, this is a government that's not crazy on evidence-based research. The National Research Council, they commissioned a report on this very question from the National Research Council about 4 months before they started operating with one-person train operations. National Research Council came out and said, look, this could have major implications for rail safety if you move to one-person operations, and therefore you should do a pilot project. It should be a 2-year pilot project. It should be closely monitored. You should determine where the route is. So why wasn't that considered in the final report cause and contributing factor, but instead was moved over to a risk factor? There may be I could go on, there may be an argument, there was a rationale for it. One thing it certainly did is when it took the media spotlight away from this as a contributing factor and put it in the category of risk, because that's what the media focused on. So, to go back to my basic point, which is that there are many unanswered questions. And that, in my view, and Transport Canada can't investigate it itself. The government's certainly not going to be keen on getting to the bottom of it. And so there needs to be an independent judicial inquiry. They've done that for other industrial accidents, for the Hinton Rail disaster in Alberta, for the Ocean Ranger. Why not in this case? People I've been in contact with, I know USA Rail have been in contact with the citizens of Lac-Mégantic, have called for, have created a petition calling for an independent inquiry. They have got support from the municipality for a number of municipalities in the area, from provincial government officials. And I know Tom Mulcair sort of has indicated, I don't know if it's been formalized or it's in it's going to be in the platform, but there is a lot of interest in an independent judicial inquiry that would get to the bottom of the issue, that would compel industry and government officials to come to the table and answer some of the questions. You know, how was the oil industry able to get away with, for such a long time, this enormous monster increase in transportation of oil by rail without any red flags being raised? How did did Transport Canada, in a kind of a willful blindness, turn the other way when this was all happening? You heard the numbers of the enormous increase. Is Transport Safety Board sufficiently independent? Should its mandate be strengthened? Should its scope be broadened? I think these are all questions and more that an independent inquiry could answer. It's been mentioned that just a woefully inadequate budget to cope with this increase. The rail safety budget actually decreased. The transportation of dangerous goods budget was frozen. It's less, its annual budget is less than the advertising budget for Natural Resource Canada. Advertise the oil sands, for God's sake. So, you know, and in my view, and this goes to the safety management system, if they persist in starving Transport Canada budgets, then I think they should suspend the safety management system, go back to the traditional oversight until they can get their act together and truly make safety management system an addition to and not a substitute for. So I think my time is up.
Bruce, that was a very revealing figure about the budget for advertising the oil sands. Our last panelist is Ali Asgary. He is a disaster and emergency management expert, and what he's going to do is walk us through what might happen if a major rail accident took place in a large urban center like Toronto. In other words, he's here to scare the hell out of us or motivate us, as the case may be.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this session. It's very exciting, and I truly love this kind of gathering, and I think that is what we should do. I'm glad that so many people have come to this session. It shows how important it is, and we do really need your support. It's for you, and I think it can be managed and handled by you. And emergency managers, at the end of the day, they rely on you to take care of what might happen, and it has been shown in the past, and that's going to happen in the future. And thank you. I should mention that I'm not really here to scare you in a sense, because the best way, I think, is to learn and learn together. And in emergency management, one key thing is that we tell our students, our people, that by scaring people, we cannot really achieve something. It's better to move into more of education. I understand, of course, Naomi's point that there's scaring in terms of believing that this is real and serious. Now, very briefly, it's going to be like an academic wrap for you tonight. I have to cover these slides in a very short period of time. And my point is to make this idea a little bit more visual so that you can see probably better what could happen. Of course, I cannot show everything tonight, but if there are interests, I can move on and provide you with this app in the future and very soon if you are interested. And the idea is to provide this to general people. And the motivation behind this, as you know, and as it was mentioned before, is that what's the point if we are not going to provide this information to cities? And after that, even if we provide this information to people or to the cities, what they are going to do with that? Forget about Toronto that might have enough resources to do something about this, but what about smaller cities outside here, remote cities like Megantic and all other cities around us? They don't have resources to handle, to process, to analyze, to work with this data. So they need support, they need these kind of tools to help them better understand what would actually happen. So very briefly, I would look at some of the key disasters that have happened very briefly, just to make my points, not to go through history of all these incidents, and also providing you with some of the scenarios that could happen. There are multiple scenarios, many scenarios. It is hard to figure out what would be the actual situation, but one can at least look at some of the possibilities that could happen here based on very realistic scenarios, let's say. Now, this simulation tries to show you some of the potential impacts. This is, by the way, an ongoing project. It hasn't been finished yet, so I'm working on it continuously to improve it, to add to it. It is going to be hopefully a major tool that can be used not only by Toronto but by all other cities. And see what are the potential solutions. Our panelists, our friends mentioned them very well, and I was really amazed with the presentation that was made. Those are all our points too, so it's not really, I'm not going to add too much onto that, but probably support that with some figures and maps maybe. This is what I call it a near-miss disaster. It happened in the city that I live, and many of you may not have even noticed that. This happened this January. That was a train derailment carrying sulfur acid, which is probably one of the biggest concerns and one of the most commonly transported hazmat by rail. And we were fortunate that this didn't end up very serious problem. But I want to raise this point that had this happened, mix of crude oil, sulfur acid, and all other chemicals together at this time, I'm living probably about 10 kilometers or 10 kilometers north of this. We had to be evacuated at that situation. So lots of this happens daily, and throughout the world, but we don't notice them. But these are for us a very important concern as emergency managers. So this could be a major emergency. You have heard about this. I'm not going to explain this. All of you have seen, have read, have heard about this. But my point here is that, look, when this happened in 1979, that place in Mississauga didn't have much development. Although they had to evacuate the whole city. This was, in our view, a large emergency. Hopefully, fortunately, this didn't end up a major catastrophe. But if this happens today, in this complex urban environment, the situation and the results would be really catastrophic. And finally, I mean, it was mentioned again about a gigantic case, but I just want to emphasize this was a true disaster and one of the historic disasters in hazmat train derailments throughout the world, and maybe would remain the same for long. And how complex, how difficult, how long it takes to manage such emergency. Consider if this happens in a major urban area, that would be a total, I mean, it's more than what we call a normal disaster. It could be a real catastrophe where there will be problems with how to manage, how to run, and how to handle this emergency situation. Now, we know that number of cars derailed are probably of utmost concern for us when we are talking about simulating disaster, train disaster or train derailments. And it was mentioned that, well, what factors contribute to this. My simulation is trying to incorporate these factors and allow users to combine these factors in the simulation. Now, what I'm using is basically this. I just brought this to show you how thick this is. This is called emergency response guidebook. Some of you have seen this. This is what emergency responders use to understand what type of hazardous chemicals they are dealing with. And these are hazmats or hazardous materials that are transported by rails and all other transportation modes. But this is how thick it is, and I'll come back to this. And you also, this is one of your homeworks too. You have to know some of this if you are living in these diameters. Now, using this, we calculated number of people in Toronto who are living in 500 meters of distance from rail lines in Toronto, okay? If you are living in 500 meters, you are exposed to 436 of these materials, meaning that the immediate isolated distance for about 436 chemicals, if transported by rail, and if you are living in 500 meters. I'm not going into detail, but our calculations, for example, shows that about 32,000 properties are within this area. It is close to 127,000 people, basically. And we have developed an app for this, so hopefully we'll provide this for you. Now, to summarize this portion, these are some of the most common hazmat transported by rail in Canada, based on Toronto Star. I just made it like a graph. From these, I have picked some of those key hazmats, because I can't simulate everything for you tonight to use. It is crude oil, chlorine, and sulfur acid. When it comes to how we calculate this, we have three types of distances we need to consider. One is what they call it immediate isolation distance. Another is what they call it day distance. Another night distance. These are coming from Transport Canada information. Now, this is one of the, what would you expect if there is a derailment of, in this case, sulfuric acid in one particular location. You can calculate this for every location, of course. Just to see, show you what is the size. This is for chlorine spill in the same location. And this is for crude oil if this happened. You see the magnitude is even much more for other chemicals. Now, the simulation I have developed is trying to find out what kind of hazmat, what kind of properties, schools, hospitals. Can I just run one of these simulations? Okay. Incorporating all these into the simulation. I'm just showing you probably one of them. that at least gives you ideas about if a regular chlorine derailment happens. This is just capturing the number of people exposed to such so I'm shifting it to so that you can see. So if you want to provide real-time information to people, that is what you want to see in every 10 minutes or 20 when you see some of these trains are passing through our cities. Do you want to have this information all the time? It is scary if you really want to have this. I have done this, the same simulation that captures all this information for emergency responders, for crude oil also. Sorry, I don't have time to show it, and to respect the time, I just stop here. But these simulations and slides are available if you want to use it and watch it yourself. But my last point about sorry about this. And I have also some maps that shows where are the areas within the city that are most exposed to different types of hazmats by districts. And finally, just one key point here is in emergency management, in disasters like a train derailment, we call them no notice. That is much more difficult to manage than emergencies that we have prior knowledge of them happening, like hurricane, like flooding, like tornadoes. This is very difficult to manage and lots of things to consider. And I'm glad our panelists also mentioned most of this. Companies try to develop smarter tools to, for example, get better feeds from us in different services. But I think they should also invest in developing a smarter train scheduling, train track monitoring, and of course, train routing. That's it, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Asgary. I think I just moved. So now we're going to hear from the members of Parliament who are here. As I said earlier, each party has 10 minutes. We're going to hear from the NDP first, and we're going to hear from Peggy Nash and Mike Sullivan. They're going to share their 10 minutes. We're going to see how they manage that. Thank you.
Could somebody wave at me when I got about 30 seconds left? My five, yeah.
I'll give you 1 minute.
Thanks. I also sit on the Transportation Committee, and that Transportation Committee spent almost a year studying the transportation of dangerous goods and came out with a very weak report. So we in the NDP put together 23 additional recommendations that form a supplementary report to that dangerous goods study. One of the things that has become apparent since Lac Megantic is it's not unique. Just since Lac Megantic, there have been at least 7, probably more, major crashes, major explosions of these bomb trains. And even in the most recent ones with the more safer vehicles, the safer rail cars, the 1232s, they blew up too. The Minister of Transportation has set a new speed limit of 40 miles an hour. CN has already voluntarily lowered to 35 miles an hour in areas in Northern Ontario where the Ogama crashes happen because they realize that 40 is too fast. So 40 miles an hour is the limit near us. All but one of those 7 crashes were traveling at considerably less than 40 miles an hour when those crashes happened. So those rail cars aren't safe. Transport Canada has done a study of containment, meaning how do we keep the stuff in the vehicles so that it doesn't break out and explode. But so far, we haven't been able to get our hands on the results of that study. Transport Canada also, or the minister, ordered the railroads to design, to come up with a risk assessment. How risky is it to go through big cities? And what can you do to mitigate that risk by lowering speeds and by moving the rail cars out of the cities? And those risk assessments were ordered last spring, so spring of 2014. We've asked for them. Transport Canada said, no, you can't have them. They're private. They're the property of the rail companies. We asked CN. CN said, sure. Transport Canada can give it to you. So yesterday I asked Transport Canada again. They said, nope, you can't have it. So this risk assessment, there was a series of risk assessments that are public that were done in 1985 of the same rail corridors for the City of Toronto. And the recommendation that came out as a result of that assessment was that there be a different grade of track created, a transportation of dangerous goods grade of track. But that was never acted on. And so rail companies are still using their old varying speed of track as their way of dealing with it. In the Lac-Mégantic disaster, the Transportation Safety Board said there were 17 or 18 different reasons for the failure. But the minister herself has said there was only one reason, and that was the operator. Yeah, exactly, same way. I didn't know about the draft report, but I do know that at the Transportation Committee, the chair of the Transportation Safety Board, Kathy Fox, said that of all the cars that broke up at Lac-Mégantic, she measured the speeds of each of them, and the trains that were the cars were traveling 20 kilometers an hour, still burst and exploded. So, there's been a lot of focus by a lot of people on making the railroads safer and putting pressure on the railroads, making them have different levels of insurance, putting pressure on the railroads themselves to operate more safely, to put more money in Transport Canada, which this government isn't doing. But ultimately, CN said it doesn't matter how safe you want to make it, there will still be a collision. There will still be a crash. So in my own view, there's only one solution then, is to avoid that crash causing harm. And the only solution currently, because the new rail cars, the new safer ones, won't be ready for 10 years, is to slow them right down. Now the railroads don't want them slowed down because that affects their profitability. And so that's one of the reasons that the government doesn't want the risk assessment to be made public. I asked at a safety meeting put on by the City of Toronto, emergency preparedness people, have you got a copy of the risk assessments? No, they do not. Well, how are you then managing where your resources should be? How do you know where the most risky place is in the city? We don't know. And this is so typical of the way this government, the federal government, treats rail safety. This isn't about transportation in a safe manner. It's about getting the product out. That's what it's all about. One final comment. That some have said, well, if they don't have any rails, they're going to put in pipes. And some people are opposed to pipes. There's something called the re-vapor pressure. And back and crude and diluted bitumen have too much of that to put it in a pipeline. So it can't travel any other way. It has to travel by rail. Thank you.
First of all, thanks to everybody for coming out tonight, and Naomi, thank you so much for being here. If you haven't read Naomi's book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, it is phenomenal. It seems to us that, I want to give a shout out to Jen Hollett too, who's a candidate in the next federal election. Thank you for being here, Jen. It seems to me a basic job of government is to do everything possible to keep its citizens safe. And I think that's what we all thought in our neighborhood, seeing those trains go by, is that government was doing its job and at least trying to keep us safe. The main way to keep us safe is through prevention, so reducing the volatility of the cargo, but then taking all measures when hazardous goods are transported to reduce the likelihood of a crash. There are many recommendations that we have made that would do that. And ultimately, if there is a crash, and at some point there are always going to be crashes, we believe in the polluter pay principle, that if you cause that pollution, if you cause that accident, then you should be held accountable. And there was a shameful lack of accountability at Lac Mégantic. I want to thank Helen and Patricia for stepping up where governments have failed, because they've done an amazing job. You know, we are living in an age of austerity where governments brag about how much of our tax dollars they're giving back to us. Well, for each one of us to have to become a rail safety expert is absolutely ridiculous. The government bragged in the House just this week that they have cut spending so much that they are down below levels of spending 50 years ago. So proportionally for our population, we're at levels below 50 years ago, and before we had Medicare, before we had many other social programs. That explains why things feel like they're coming apart at the seams. But people like Helen and Patricia have stepped up, and what they did, I think, is a real model of community action. They were concerned about this potential hazard. They informed themselves. They decided to go door to door through 2 winters now and summers. They've gone door to door with petitions, talking to their neighbors, informing them about what's going on, and they've been engaging the community. We've held community meetings locally. I know Mike held a community meeting, and they have really pushed us as politicians to become even more engaged. I mean, we were raising this issue, as Mike said, he's on the Transportation Committee, but we have worked together, so we've acted on their behalf to ask questions in the House of Commons, to inform our speeches in the House. We've written letters to the ministers involved and brought them to the Transportation Committee. And I have to say, Patricia's presentation, I only heard the one to the House of Commons Committee, but it was one of the finest, most concise, precise, articulate, informed presentations I have ever heard, and I have sat through a lot of presentations by witnesses, so absolute top kudos to you for that. But ultimately, we should expect our governments to be accountable. We need transparency, we need accountability. The minister prevented her Transport Canada officials from even coming to a community meeting we held in the Junction. They refused to attend and basically speak with the community. So I was just thinking, I thought about Christine's idea about a Director General of Safety, and I thought, what a great idea that is. We obviously do need whistleblower protection, but what about requiring Transport Canada to come, officials, to come and meet, not with some government-appointed committee somewhere, but come to the community and have to report to the community and look into the eyes of the people who live right near the tracks and tell us what's in those cars. And I really like the idea of the web-based safety data being posted. And Professor, your diagram scared the hell out of me. I know you said it wasn't going to, but I look at that and I say, oh, there it goes, right by my house. And there's others that live in closer than I do. And our time is up, but I think there is nothing, we need effective politicians, we need effective government. There is nothing as important as an engaged community holding us to account. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Peggy and Mike. Just a quick reminder that you're up next. So get your questions in, pieces of paper, and give them to Helen and Amanda. So our last speaker is the Honourable Carolyn Bennett, Member of Parliament for St. Paul's.
I do want to thank Patricia and Helen and the terrific PowerPoint that really focused everybody here about the clear things you're asking for. It's the very best thing in advocacy and activism is to actually put out front what you would consider a win. And I think that you know, is just this room reminds me of all of the advocacy that we did for Women's College Hospital, and lots of good things have happened in this room. So I thank you all for being here. But I think the point of tonight was also to say that what happens and how we would design a system where citizens would really have a say in putting together experts and people who can really provide the background, but also the recommendations together with engaged citizens is really what has to happen. But also having somebody like Naomi who is prepared to put it all in context about the importance of climate change on this issue, the importance of dealing with moving this stuff in a safe way, that pipeline versus train, you cannot do any of these things in isolation, and so I thank you for doing that. I think that we were blessed, I think, to hear from the panelists, and I think that our job as parliamentarians is always to make sure that people know we're listening. And so the assured listening piece is part of how we make decisions, and so I think that Greg's real lesson on safety versus profit, so I think is huge, and the role that government must play. But also the role of October 19th and being able to hold people to account. I think Christine scared us shitless, and in terms of how documents can get changed in terms of what they think people can handle as opposed to what is the truth. And I think that we can't have transportation safety boards that actually modify and I think that frightened us as in terms of the numbers of inspectors, whether it's food safety, whether you name it, this seems to have gone downhill, and I think one of the questions tonight was about reversing the cuts that have happened, and of course I think that's imperative, but I too thought your idea of a Director General for risk safety that is sector specific, because I think that it sounds very clear that air and road is, that the expertise needs to be really targeted. But also unannounced regular inspections. It's the only thing that works on figuring whether you know, servers and their tips are organized. Revenue Canada seems to know how to do that. I think we should be a little bit better at it in the areas that actually protect our lives. I think that in Bruce's analysis, I think was unbelievable in terms of why it was supposed to be a pilot. And again, how you can take or refuse to take evidence, or at least if you're moving forward in any way, that it ought to be a pilot. And I think that again, it seems not surprising that some of these that some of those things got taken out of the report. And Ali did scare us shitless, and but I think it's what we're saying. And even though here I go wading into controversial again, that in Ali's presentation he did talk about routing. So did frankly the Transportation Safety Board in terms of in their recommendation about how it could, you know, that they need to have route planning and analysis, and there has to be a risk assessment on where this tough stuff is going. And I know Safe Communities is aligned with all the other communities, but I think that we can find very clear metrics about where the risk could be much lessened, and I think Hans' piece that you got at the door that explains that if just CNCP shared their track, you could make this this change very easily, and that's why we all come together. So I think in the questions that were put before us around obviously the stabilization, absolutely, increased rates and enforcement, absolutely, putting the money back, absolutely. I think on the insurance, I think that there's some debate, because at the moment the people who own the oil in the tanks don't have any liability at all. The people, and I think that the people who own the trains, the role of the government, I think that the issue of liability really needs to be on the table in terms of how it's shared and how we go forward. The transparency and accountability, obviously updated technology, we are concerned about the tank car, when these new tank cars were the same tank cars that actually caused the problem in Northern Ontario. Whatever they prescribed isn't working, so we've got to do better and we've got to do faster. And I was pleased to meet somebody who seems to have has designed a better mousetrap here, and I hope he'll get to explain a little bit about what he's got in store. In the independent risk analysis, I think that all of the sort of wolf or the fox manning the chicken coop stuff that happens in regulation, monitoring, in government, we need to really look at what this looks like, as whether things are truly independent or not. And obviously the train speeds, it's been, I think, 18 years since I sat in a house with Bill Graham as the house was roaring, and that was the issue. Now this is a very serious issue in terms of these hazardous materials, and this is no longer just a nuisance of a shaking house. This is about what could happen. I guess my whole brand as being on citizen engagement and as a physician, sort of knowing, asking what's wrong, listening together, making a plan. I've always believed that engaged citizens are the only ways we get this, and I think we've learned that tonight. That in the 2 town hall meetings that Christia Freeland and Adam Vaughn and I have done, where we've had over 100 people every time, the knowledge that was in the audience was spectacular, as well as the knowledge on the panels. We've got to find real mechanisms for citizen engagement that are meaningful. In St. Paul's, I remember once Judy Brebick commented on the St. Paul's model, where we don't blame different levels of government, we all come together twice a year to be accountable to our citizens. But I think on something like this, it is almost like the Berger inquiry on the pipeline. I mean, that you have to go into communities and listen to them, and you have to make sure the right people are at the table all the time. So I know it's about an attitude of, when you do citizen engagement, do you actually have an attitude that you will learn something, or have you already made up your mind already? And I am tired of these information sessions where government is made to look like it's listening when it's clearly already made up its mind. So Don Lenihan and I wrote a little piece that comes out in an ebook in Canada 2020 on Wednesday on actually rebuilding trust, but it's really how we tap in to citizens and civil society going forward, and I hope you have a look at it, plus the piece that on my website about which is about the role of civil society. It is the only way we're going to get this done, and it is by citizens having the information to make good decisions and to shape government policy and what I lovingly refer to as democracy between elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolyn, and that concludes the speeches part of the evening, so the rest is yours. I want to thank our excellent panelists and all of the members of Parliament for being here and listening this evening and sharing your thoughts. At this point, I'm going to hand over the reins to Patricia from Safe Rail Communities. She's going to MC the discussion part. It has been my pleasure to be your MC this evening. Don't forget to come out, bring friends, bring coworkers on July 5th for the Jobs, Justice, Climate March. There are plans afoot for a no oil by rail block. I can imagine a very good puppet to go with that. Please get involved, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for